Hey guys, welcome to week 1 of Novel Bootcamp. This is the class that's going to take you from idea to finished draft in 12 weeks of writing. We've done our free intro so far, and we had another free intro a couple days ago, so hopefully you're able to... Whoops, I forgot my camera's down there. Hopefully you're able to join us for one of those. If you were not, that's also okay, and we are... Oops, sorry. That's also okay if you are not able to join us for the week 0, and we are going to be just jumping in today with a lot on prose and premise. So we're getting into just the words on the page and the way that we are putting paragraphs and sentences together and choosing our vocabulary that is going to construct just the basic fabric of our story. And we're going to be looking a little bit, but not as much as we will in the coming weeks, at premise. That's going to be that idea that is going to be guiding the construction of the rest of your story, making sure that we are creating a cohesive narrative that feels like, it makes sense and there's nothing extraneous or left out. A premise is kind of going to be the guiding idea that is going to be giving shape to your story. So let's jump in with our first couple slides here, which are going to be on WordCamp. This is this new community that we've just started and are just now growing. ScriptCamp is going to be ScriptCamp was our first of these many different sort of Discord communities that we are growing in an effort to spread knowledge and expertise from people who know what they're talking about, to teach these live classes in different categories like Creator Camp, Film Camp, Word Camp, and Script Camp, which is based on screenwriting. So make sure to join any of those that sound interesting to you. We have lots of free classes, events, and workshops that are going to be going on as we get these new communities up and running. And we would love to have you around for these. And the next tier up is going to be these paid classes, which are for VIP members or for boot campers. And we have Writers Labs on Saturday, which are sort of like office hours that you can come and get extra one-on-one help on anything that you are working on. So make sure to drop by our new servers and say hi if that all sounds intriguing to you somehow. We have new classes coming soon, taught by, not just me, but different instructors that we'll be bringing in for different topics. And we're just looking forward to getting more of this set up and creating a larger community here that you can use to meet peers and improve your skills over time. So here's a couple of the membership options. Our basic membership is just $9 a month. If you don't want to sign up for the boot camps or the Writers Lab, that might be an option for just coming to the Wednesday, Thursday classes on Script Camp, and you get access to our video library. That's going to be recordings of all of our classes. So it's going to have videos like this one here and many other topics that we have covered in the past before, including guest classes taught by other pro writers. So that's not going to include Bootcamp or Writers Lab, which are part of Unlimited. That's $49 a month, but you can sign up for yearly, in which case you get just almost 40% off with that. That's going to include over 70 hours of live classes every month in various topics. Right now our biggest topics are screenwriting, features, and TV shows. And then we are adding, of course, more prose-focused classes too. So that's going to get you all kinds of different benefits that you can see on this chart right here. We also have a coaching tier with a yearly option as well. So if you're looking for more one-on-one guidance and help, this is a great place to go. What else? How to enroll. So you can buy the course on its own at scriptcamp.net/classes, or you can start your 2-week free trial for unlimited membership, which you'll need to proceed in this course beyond this class today. You can do that at scriptcamp.net/membership. If you've not yet signed up, then make sure to sign up before that next class in this series. Was there anything else that we wanted people to know about Nacho?
No, that's just, keep in mind you can vote yes in the poll, and you can get immediate access to the camp channels. If you plan to sign up for the 12-week bootcamp, just you can click on the button there to vote.
Thank you for that. Yep, so that'll be in the chat on Discord, which you can find on the left-hand side of your Discord screen. If you scroll down all the way past those top text chat channels, you'll find one that's called Classroom. If you mouse over that, you'll find a small white button that says Open Chat, and you can use that to view the chat and view this poll. And click on the number 1 if you intend to sign up but have not done so yet. All right, so let's look at our slate of stuff coming up. So we have this camp for the next 12 weeks. This is the remainder, the next 11 weeks. This is the remainder of the entire year for our Saturday slots. That's 12 to 2. We also have on Script Camp, we have features, which is a new feature film writing course. It's like How to Write a Movie 101, starts October 7th. And new TV class starts October 16th, which is like how to write a TV pilot, essentially. Takes you from idea to first draft of one or the other of those scripts. We also have a bunch of different groups and activities that happen every week. Recurring on Tuesdays, we have this script swap at 5 p.m. All these times are in Pacific. So you can trade scripts with someone to get feedback and provide feedback. It's just a good way to make sure you're getting a nice critically constructive eye on your work by contributing and by swapping that effort with somebody else. Table reads Sundays 2 to 5. That's where members will bring scripts for the group to read together and to give feedback to. We also have Writer's Lab, which I've mentioned before, Saturdays 4 to 6 p.m. That's like that office hours where you can come with anything you're working on for some extra help. This coming Sunday is also a fantasy group at 5, which I will be coming to and doing about a 1-hour talk on magic spells and creatures. So if that sounds interesting to you, check that out, or any of our different groups. And if you'd like to start your own group too, you can message me or Nacho. All right, lots of information there up at the top. Let's look at the overview of the schedule for the upcoming bootcamp. We're not going to extensively look at every single class day, but let's at least look at the basics here. So week 0 was the intro and overview of the course, where we just kind of look at how we're going to be writing a book in 12 weeks. Week 1 is all about prose with a bit of premise. We're going to really try to finalize your log lines and premises next week. This week, we just need to lay some foundational information about how books work and how words are going to be working on the page. So, and in this process, we're going to be developing the log lines for your book's premise to sort of try to finalize next week. So don't worry about having a perfect log line this week. We want to make sure that we're looking at exactly how our paragraphs and words and tense and voice are going to be working in this first week here. And we're going to just be all the time filling out this sketchbook of ideas, which is remember the blank document that we created, that we're going to be keeping all your unsorted ideas in that are going to be including research or concepts you have for where the characters might be going or what characters might be in the story, or what lines of dialogue we might be including, or any subplots, things like that just come to your mind you're going to want to keep in one location. So that's the sketchbook, and I would have that open during class to be filling out as we go, so you always have that open in another tab. All right, so that's going to be this week all about prose. Week 2 is log lines and queries, so we're going to actually talk queries way earlier than in most classes on this kind of would. But the idea is that a query letter is sort of what you send to agents to try to get someone to represent you for your book, but it includes a little bit of a plot synopsis, which gives you a pretty good look at everything that would occur in that story. So we're going to actually read a couple of those and maybe work out a rough version of something like what your query might be. And for the same reasons that we come up with a log line very early to kind of keep you on track to the spine of what the architecture of your story as it was intended. So we might just come up with those early versions of query letters next week, or at least read some query letters and get a strong sense of what that looks like. Week 3 is on characters. We're going to look at how to design a cast of characters and figure out the essential steps in each of those characters' journeys, focusing, of course, on your central protagonist, because Western storytelling is so focused on protagonist-based structures that we really like to have that strong A story, but there's a lot of room for kind of ensemble plots or multiple subplots in books because you just have so much space to write in and so much space to work in. So week 4 is on world building, and we will be completing story beats outlined by around then. That's just the major events of the story in the correct order that they're more or less going to be going in. Week 5 is on outlining, so we're going to start those scene cards. That's a full paragraph or more for every scene, so we're trying to figure out what's going to happen in every scene of the book so that you front load the work of figuring out what's supposed to happen early on, and we don't have to then worry about it when you're in the middle of the book trying to figure out, oh god, what happens next. We're going to complete those scene cards in week 6, so we have 2 weeks to do scene cards as opposed to my other boot camps that you guys may be familiar with. We just try to do all these steps in 1 week each. You have more time because a book is just a more expansive, more detailed document, so you will have 2 weeks for scene cards, and we'll be starting on week 7. So we go to pages on November 5th. That's when, from there, we'll be writing about 10,000 words a week, more or less. It might be more like 15,000 if you have a longer book, but 10,000 words a week, 2,000 words on every weekday, and you're going to try to keep that consistent, keep your momentum up all the way to our finish date, which is December 17th. And along the way, those classes are going to look at things like transitions, second act, escalation, third act. We're just moving through whatever part of the story that you're probably going to more or less be on at that moment. We'll have that lecture focused on that section for that class. and maybe sometimes have a bonus topic like on week 8. I want to talk magic, because I didn't know where else to slot that in exactly, and I am just a specialist in, fantasy, sci-fi, and horror kind of storytelling, so I thought, wanted to just bring in a couple bonus topics here and there on those areas of specialty, just because that's what I would teach the best class on. Okay, so there's your whole overview for everything coming up. Does anyone have any questions on this before we jump into prose stuff for today?
Develop the logline for your book's premise, prose and premise. I want to understand this thing. Where we will start and how. What is the topic?
For today?
Yes.
The topic for today. Okay, so the topic for today is prose, which are just, how do we write sentences? What are the parts of speech? How do we what is a paragraph, and what does really good, crisp, beautiful prose look like on the page? And we're also going to talk a little about premise, which is like the idea for your book. What is the book about? And how you would express or explain to someone what your book is about in about one sentence.
Okay. One thing I have to say, if I use past and present tense in one paragraph, is it good or bad?
Usually you don't want to be changing between tense in the same paragraph. We'll have a couple slides on that later in this today's class, so we'll talk more about tense. But generally, you don't want to be changing tense at all. Like, unless you're, for instance, you have a character that, tells a story of something that happened to them in the past tense, in which case you might move from present to past or something like that. But usually you don't want to change tense within a paragraph.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, thank you for the question. Any other questions on the overview before we go into today's class? Oops. All right, let's jump in that case, and we'll look at the overview for today. So we are going to start by, if you wrote a paragraph assignment for this class, which is okay if you weren't there for week 0 and you missed this, or you just didn't get time to do this or something like that, but if you did have time today to write a 1 paragraph of fiction to turn in for us to review, you can paste that into our Google Doc, which if you open up the assignments channel in the Discord, just scroll down to where you'll find the text channel that's called Novel Bootcamp, and you'll find assignments. And you can, I'll just repost the link that we have there in our current chat channel too. But this is a Google Doc that you can paste your assignment that you wrote into. You can do so anonymously if you want to, or you can put your name on it if you want like more direct feedback. But let me share that in our chat currently. There we go. So if you wrote a paragraph for today and you want some feedback on it, we're going to be interspersing these feedback sessions just throughout the class. I'm not really going to be going back and forth with the student and asking them questions and things about the words they've chosen. I'm just sort of going to be reviewing it and marking them up as we go kind of quickly. So it's totally cool if you want to just paste what you wrote and not include any context about who you are, if you truly just want to remain anonymous. But whatever you want to do, we'll be looking at some of student paragraphs today. We'll start with a genre poll. I want to just see what people in the class are writing, what we're interested in writing, and what you guys are working on, and maybe that will help me kind of skew the instruction one way or another. And if everyone is writing, fantasy stories, or everybody's writing contemporary or something like that, that might just help me decide what topics to spend a little more time on in class. It seems like am I not visible on Discord, or is it not sharing the right window? 1 second. Can you guys see the screen? Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay, so we'll take a genre poll and we'll just figure out what is everybody writing. And then you'll have some time to tell us about what you read for the class, because we had either the choice to choose one of a couple novelettes that I suggested, or you could pick something on your own that you just wanted to read. So we'll have, 5-10 minutes for someone to just speak up and tell us anything interesting you read recently and what you've kind of been learning or noticing in that. We'll start with a, after we get through those, we'll go into prose introduction, and we will talk about how you can make just even the description of anything interesting by adhering to a couple key principles. We can look at the description of this bathroom from this book by Jeffrey Digenes, and we will look at parts of speech, paragraphs, guiding ideas, and complexity of thought, tense and POV, and then we'll look at vocabulary with some examples of excerpts from both Cormac McCarthy, H.P. Lovecraft books, and kind of like that spectrum of complexity, which will be interesting to look at. And all throughout class, I want to just be going back to this document if anyone has, paragraphs written up that they would like some feedback on. All right, so that's what we're going to be doing today, and we'll be looking a little bit towards the end at premise and log lines and just going over the very basics of the idea of your book. Next week is when we're really going to try to focus on that more, and by the end of next week's class, have that log line finalized as, the one sentence that explains, this is what my book is, this is what it's about. But all this time, again, be filling out your sketchbook and, filling in the gaps, filling in the blanks of things you don't know yet. The essentials that we should be working on are you should be figuring out what genre you want to write. If you have a title in mind, then that would be something you might want to come up with early, but it's okay because titles are, sort of interchangeable in a lot of ways. But yeah, be thinking of genre, your target market, whether you're writing for adults, YA, middle grade, or chapter books, and your genre. If you're not quite clear on what genre you want to write yet, you should be trying to decide and trying to make those choices and figure out what you're going to be spending the next 11 weeks on. It's tough to choose sometimes, but hopefully we can give you that little boost to figuring out what you want to work on. And later today we have Writer's Lab at 4 o'clock, so if you'd like even more help to try to figure out what is it that I'm working on, what genre do I want to do, or any questions like that, then we'll have lots of space and time for you to do that. All right, so before anything else, if you've not yet made your sketchbook, I would do that now. This is that blank Google document where you're going to be keeping and organizing your ideas, questions, and notes for the project as you develop it. So if you've not yet made that, just blank, empty document called Name of Book Sketchbook, then now would be the time to do that. So go right ahead and make your Google Doc and be filling that out throughout the class. So ground rules to remind everyone of: get used to sharing ideas even at the early stages. I know it's tough to do that, but in order to get that good feedback, we need to be able to, even share the incomplete, not quite finished versions of this for feedback. We're going to be using real names in the course, or at least not screen names. So please, if you can right-click on your name, you can change your nickname, or we can change it for you if you're having trouble doing that. But you can use a nickname, middle name, something like that. Just we don't want to be using, strings of numbers and characters. All right, so your book is going to be, I think we're hearing some feedback from, or some background noise from somebody's mic. If you guys wouldn't mind, just keep the mics muted by clicking the gray microphone icon in the bottom left of your Discord screen. You should be able to find that. What are we doing? Oh, let me move myself out of the way. So, we're writing a book in 12 weeks. Is this book going to be amazingly good? No, probably not. Is it going to be any good? Who knows? It's not really the point. This is a first draft, and first drafts are not going to be amazing or perfect, and we should move beyond the idea in the first place that any individual book needs to be good or perfect or whatever. So don't worry way too much about how this turns out. Finishing this is the important step and is more than most people ever really can make themselves do. So it's a huge victory just to finish this. We're going to start with a logline next week after we get to, these first couple of classes are going to be foundational knowledge and stuff that we just need to get in place. Once we move past that and into next week, we're going to start with that logline, and we're going to always be filling out sketchbook, story beats, roadmap. Those are the major events of the story in the correct order that they need to go in. They are not going to be quite as detailed, though, as the scene cards, which are the more expanded form of that story beats roadmap. That's really going to tell you what's happening in every scene. You should be able to, we should never be lost as to what's going to happen next in the story. And then finally, at our 7-week mark, which is in November, we're going to go to pages, meaning you're going to actually, for the National Novel Writing Month, for the span of that month, November, you're going to be intensely writing 2,000 words a day, more or less, in an effort to try to finish a 50 to 90,000 word book by December 17th. Okay, that's the steps. If this sounds like a lot of work, well, you are correct. Writing books is a whole lot of work. And it's not always fun. And a big part of who's going to become a professional at this versus who's not is, are you able to push past that point where it's no longer really fun? And you will find moments of fun throughout, but don't count on enjoying this all the way through. It's kind of a slog. Anyone who's written for National Novel Writing Month before, I'm sure knows a bit of what I'm talking about here. It's not always easy, and the best thing that we can do is just try to power through it, try to find moments to enjoy, and just find your own kind of enjoyment of the process, because if you can't enjoy the process of doing this at all, you're going to have a miserable time. It's just really difficult to finish a book. So let's take a little poll in the chat. Feel free to let us know what genre are we writing. If you haven't decided, you can put like a slash between a couple things if you want. But I just want to get a sense of what are we working on. So do we have contemporary, fantasy, sci-fi, horror, historical, romance, action-adventure, mystery, thriller, biography, or comedic, or other? And then I have a separate category underneath all of these for literary, surrealist, experimental, or just something weird. So let us know. Let's take a look at the chat. And let's figure out what our class is writing. Feel free now to go to that classroom chat, click that small white word bubble, and weigh in. Oh, Nacho made a little poll here. That's fantastic. Okay, great. So you can click those little numbers, and you can vote. And I think I should subtract one vote from all of these, right, Nacho, because you have to have submitted one of them to make the poll option show up.
The bot voted once.
The bot voted. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So I subtract one from all these. All right. So we've got looks like 2 fantasy, 2 sci-fi, no action adventure. We have a contemporary, no crime or romance. We have 1 historical, 1 mystery, 1 horror, and 1 other. Does the other want to tell us what the others?
Is writing
Go ahead.
crime.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know where to put my stuff at. I'm sorry. This is
That's
so
okay.
busy for me.
No problem. Can you see our slideshow?
Huh?
Can you see our slideshow?
Yeah, I can
you can.
see that.
Okay, no big deal. Yeah, there's just a poll in the chat, but if you're writing crime, that is going to be 2 crime books in that case. Okay. Cool. Okay, this is a pretty diverse group. This is a little bit of everything. The only thing that's really not on here is action adventure. Too bad. And I guess what is this? No one's writing romance either. Okay, you guys don't know it's the top selling genre. I went over that. Come on, you don't want to make money? Just kidding. All right, so yeah, everyone should be writing whatever interests them, whatever you want to read, whatever the kind of thing that you wish would exist, or that you're like, oh, that sounds like such a good idea that's got to exist already. And then you look around for it and you can't find it and you're like, wow, it doesn't exist? That's the kind of idea that I would really suggest gravitating towards. Okay, so in that case, it looks like we have 3 fantasy, actually. Is fantasy our most common one, then? In that case, great. That's what I was hoping for. All right, perfect. Cool. Okay, so very slight edge towards fantasy, but a good mix of everything else. I just wanted to get a sense of what to focus on, what to look at in the class. This tells me there's not really one thing to angle most of the instruction towards, but I do feel good about including a couple fantasy-focused topics later on in that case. All right, Nacho suggests I should move my frame rate down to 15 frames per second, so I will try that just if the video is not working right. Stream quality 15. There we go. Okay. All right, let's keep going. So what did we read? Who wants to weigh in and tell us what they read in preparation for the class, whether it was one of the suggestions that I gave for novelettes to choose from or something on your own? What did you guys read for today, and what did you notice? What did you like? What did you learn? Anyone at all can just feel free to shout out and tell us about it.
Okay, I'll read that one paragraph where you describe something you said.
Well, we're gonna. That's the paragraph assignment. We're gonna do that in the class. Right now, we're just talking about what we read in preparation for the class because one of the assignments last time was just read something. Just pick something to read.
I finished Crawdad Sing.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
What'd you think? What'd you like, or what'd you notice? What'd you learn?
Oh my God, I loved it. She was so descriptive. I mean, I've never lived out there in the swamp, ever been there, and I could feel it. Everything that she described, and the energy, the insects, everything that she pointed out, because she's a zoologist in real life, and she studied the lives of animals in Africa. So I felt all of that, everything, and the isolation of the girl and her survival and her strength, and yeah, I enjoyed it. And
Awesome.
That was her first novel.
Yeah, that's a huge success too. Mm-hmm. That one, so lots of good details, lots of good world building. You felt like very immersed in the setting.
Right, exactly.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have a class on world building where we'll talk about different ways to do that. You know that you are reading a really immersive world building book when you can sort of like you feel the mosquitoes on the back of your neck and you can feel like the layer of sweat on your face from the descriptions that the characters are going through. So yeah, that stuff is awesome to pay attention to. And thank you for that. Anyone else? What did we read? What did we notice? What did we like?
Yeah, I read Stephen King's Fairy Tale, and yeah, finished that one. It's the first act is really cool. It's interesting. It's about a kid who is, taking care of his alcoholic dad, and he makes a promise to God: if you make my dad, stop drinking, then I will, help somebody or do something, right? And then there's, he happens to run into a crotchety old man who breaks his leg, and he's like, oh, okay, this is what God wanted me to do. I got to help this guy. And so he becomes the caregiver for this old man who's kind of like, just a real jerk, right? And it's really interesting. I really like this part of the novel. But then the bulk of the story is journeying into this magical world, like, Narnia or, Wizard of Oz or something, right? And just the opposite of Delia Owen's world building. It just felt like, he's just totally winging it, and I've read probably almost every Stephen King novel, most of them, and there are some where even if he says he doesn't outline, I mean, you can really tell that there's some planning or something going on, because there are some that feel really, you just feel transported to this world. In this case, it just felt like, it just sort of making it up as he went along, and it didn't feel like a coherent world. And there were lots of things that just kind of threw me off. The other major problem with it is a lot of the big conflicts and battles were just kind of felt low stakes, because it felt like this, main character just breezes through everything. So he didn't really face a lot of challenges. And, he's the chosen one and blah, blah, blah. And, yeah, so I guess overall, this is probably like, not, I would say the worst Stephen King book that I read was one that was like just a little girl who's like lost in the woods, like the whole time it's just her
The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon.
Yeah, that one, that's the one that I like the least. This is like just a little bit better than that for me. I mean, but some of his books are some of my favorites, so I don't know how he does it or how it works, but for me this one didn't work.
Okay, well, good to know. Good to look at books that you don't think work as well and also realize sort of why. So you think that it was the lack of efficient world building, the lack of immersion that sort of resulted in a story that didn't feel cohesive to you?
Yeah, it just, the world wasn't that interesting, I guess. It had a lot of potential, but it was just sort of like, oh, this random thing and this random thing and this random thing. I mean, I'm not sure how to. Eyes of the Dragon and N is one of my favorite, novellas or whatever. And Wizard of Glass. A lot of the gunslinger books, some of them had this problem as well, and some of them felt more like an interesting world that he created. But yeah, for me this one wasn't for me.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. Haven't read that one yet. In fact, I grew up with a huge shelf full of Stephen King books because my parents were a huge fan, so I've always had them around, but mostly read Joe Hill instead of Stephen King, his son, and huge fan of Joe Hill. Anyone else? What did you read? What did we notice? What did we like? What did we learn?
I'm reading Goes Across the River, and I found some similarities with Doris Lessing's writings, specifically the Sphinx, the mention of the Sphinx. And then I also found some similarities with my own writing in conveying the natural world. And it's very detailed, very interesting. I'm coming up on halfway through. It was a recommendation that you had for a reading, Connor.
Yeah, you're farther in it than me now. I'm not quite even halfway, so no spoilers.
Okay. What do I like? I like the detail. I like reading about the natural world.
I think the
I'm
dialect
not
is
really
pretty well done. Like that sort of culturally specific jargon and the like, just the specificity of the culture that it's in. I kind of like that about it. Go ahead. Sorry to cut you off.
Yes, yes. I did also notice that, and I'm trying to figure out where it's all going.
Mhm.
And I guess there's a lot of setting up here. It's not boring at all. There's a lot of sex, but it's told in a very tasteful way, so it's
Mhm.
very good. And I'm learning. I actually, from the feedback that I got from that editor, I'm kind of seeing that this author uses a lot of dialogue in some places,
Mhm.
and that it's very inventive, it's very diverse. And I think that what I'm realizing is that the reason why I haven't been writing a lot of dialogue is because it's really difficult to do.
Mhm.
So I've just been kind of taking the easy way out.
I
you
see.
know?
Well, the nice thing is with
Yeah.
books, you can get away with way less dialogue than a play or a movie or something like that. We can have whole scenes in books play out with no dialogue, much easier.
Mhm.
So there's a certain art to it. Some authors use more, some authors use less, but always good to find, like whatever you struggle with. I would try to read authors that are really good at that.
Okay. Yeah, good tip.
Thanks, Carmen.
That's about it, I think.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we should maybe just keep going because I hope that everyone is reading. We're not going to quiz you. There's no like discussion questions that need to be answered, but we just want you to always be reading. In every class, I will ask, what have we been reading recently? Who wants to weigh in? Tell us, what did you notice? What did you learn? What did you like or not like? It's all okay. There's no right or wrong answers. We just need to be reading. There's absolutely no way you're going to be a very good writer unless we are reading. Okay, shall we go into prose? So I really wanted to get one of my old English teachers from high school in this class today. I wasn't able to get them for this one. I'm going to try to get them for a later one, though. Let's look at some, and hopefully they'll be proud of me. Hopefully they'll give me the affection that I never got from back in school. But so you get the idea. We're going to look at some of these basic writing principles. As far as I understand them, I am not an English teacher. You know, I got C's back in school. But over time, you learn things, you read things, and just by reading and writing and, reading all kinds of things, not just books, not just fiction, not just nonfiction, everything, plays, technical writing, science books, textbooks, reading everything will all just increase your skills at this, and it will help you build your own sort of rules and methods that you will be using that sort of make up what we call your style. So, I am not an English teacher, I'm not a professor, but I will do my very best to teach you what I do know from, my background as someone who writes a lot of scripts and has worked in Hollywood at least since 2017, and has been writing books since I was a kid, and trying to study this, and understand this for a really long time. So I would recommend also taking English classes with professors at colleges and things like this, because this is not a definitive course on how to write English well, but this is sort of my mini crash course. This is the Bootcamp crash course, I guess you could say. All right, with those disclaimers aside, here are some of the main principles for writing books, and for writing prose in general. Use the active voice, and use concrete and specific language. And we have a couple things on here, a couple slides that I would say if you're taking notes and writing stuff down, I would write these things down. We have another one in a couple slides, but let's just start with this one. Use the active voice, use concrete and specific language. I would write those things down if you're not quite sure what, if you're struggling with prose, you're trying to learn more about prose, you're trying to figure out what makes really good prose in a book. these two things are at the top of the list. So using these rules, you can make even a very simple description of a bathroom interesting, which we looked last week briefly at this description of a bathroom from the novel Middlesex by Jeffrey Digenese. And I wanted to look at that again today and maybe break it down piece by piece, one sentence at a time, and we try to figure out the guiding idea of this paragraph and how everything's working together. I think maybe a good way to start will just be looking at some really good prose and just reading it and hearing it. So I'm going to read this out loud. Is there any place as comforting as an old institutional pre-war bathroom? The basement bathroom at Baker and Inglis was done up like a box at the opera. Edwardian lighting fixtures gleamed overhead. The sinks were deep white bowls set in blue slate. When you bent to wash your face, you saw tiny cracks in the porcelain, as in a Ming vase. Gold chains held the drain stoppers in place. Beneath the taps, dripping had worn the porcelain thin in green stripes. All right, just a description of a bathroom. It's like 4 or 5 sentences. Most paragraphs are going to be, 3 to 6 sentences long, but there's a lot of exceptions on either side of that. I think what I'd like to do is I'm going to go through this and just sort of take it apart one sentence at a time and explain what it's doing, what the point is, and what to pay attention to. Then we're going to look at this topic of what is a guiding idea and how is this going to help us construct paragraphs. All right, let's get into it. So the first sentence here is there anything as comforting as an old institutional pre-war bathroom? So we're starting by engaging the reader with a direct address as well as setting up the idea of what this paragraph will be about. So we don't usually think of a bathroom as comforting, right? So this paragraph will be building a case for this, advancing that idea with each sequential sentence in some way. So this is one of those sort of thesis statements where it's going to, at the very start, we're going to say, here's what this paragraph is going to be about. Next sentence. The basement bathroom at Baker and Inglis was done up like a box at the opera. This is sort of like a bird's eye view of what we're going to now go into more description about. It's like an establishing shot of what we're about to see expounded upon. Edwardian lighting fixtures gleamed overhead. The sinks were deep white bowls set in blue slate. Very specific, concrete nouns, details presented in an active voice with strong verbs. We could have just said, there were Edwardian lighting fixtures overhead, but we've instead chosen to say that they gleamed overhead, a stronger verb that's going to help us to picture the action better. The sinks were deep white bowls set into blue slate, which, we have a little more room in books than we do in scripts to use the verbs of the forms of the verb to be. Things, something was or things were, someone is or things are. It's not always going to be ideal, but in books you get a lot more room to use this and a lot more mileage out of just words like that. When you bent to wash your face, you saw tiny cracks in the porcelain, as in a Ming vase. So we're again engaging the reader by inviting them to imagine themselves in that scene and interacting with it, so they can sort of start to maybe subconsciously, envision themselves in that world. Gold chains held the drain stoppers in place. We're still active, still expressing these passive things in active ways. Gold chains held the drain stoppers in place. Beneath the taps, dripping had worn the porcelain thin in green stripes. We're using specific colors and imagery and these small details that are helping paint the larger mental picture of this scene. So that's just a breakdown of what every sentence is pretty much doing, and it's bringing me to this idea which I'm just going to talk about, this idea of complexity of thought. So a paragraph basically encompasses one thought, an idea that guides it, which is divided into sentences, each of which address and advance that idea. This is that second thing that I would write down if you are taking notes today, and one of those things to have on a sticky note next to your computer. A paragraph encompasses one thought, divided into sentences which address and advance that idea. Are there any questions or comments on this before I go any further from this really core principle? Everybody cool with this? Let me check our text chat as well. And Nacho has linked us a book called Sin and Syntax, How to Craft Wicked Good Prose. Thank you for that. All right, so hopefully we're seeing that a paragraph is about one thought. I think that we can see a lot of the time that that thought is going to be stated early on or sometimes even up front, but a lot of the time it is not as well. Sometimes we have to kind of like piece together what that guiding idea is, and it might not be fully clarified until we get to the end of the sentence. And a lot of the time when you're writing, you may find when you're going back into editing on your second draft that you have sort of front-loaded too many of these guiding ideas, and you can actually either move it to the end or just take out that first sentence altogether. So just a little tip for you there. Let's look at... I want to talk about parts of speech and parts of a sentence, and then we're going to go more into guiding ideas, and we're going to try to figure out what the guiding ideas of some paragraphs are, and just focus on tips for how to highlight what that guiding idea is, and how to make sure that you are supporting your arguments that you are kind of making in your writing. So let's start with prose and these English class essentials that we may have, some cursory knowledge of, and there's not going to be any quizzes or tests on these things, but it's just nice to have a refresher and be able to talk in these terms because, when you're if you want to get really good feedback, then sometimes we have to phrase things in pretty technical terms. So let's do that kind of quick crash course in these academic essentials about just writing English. So parts of a sentence. We have subjects, which is going to be a noun or pronoun that performs the action of the sentence. We have a verb, which is the action performed by the subject. And then we have a complement, which can be two main things. There's the direct object, which is the receiving the action of the verb. So this would be, Jeremy throws the ball. Jeremy's the subject. Throws is the verb. The ball is the direct object. And then we have this other main complement, which is called the predicate. And let's break apart predicate. Pre means before. Dicet, Latin means to say. So it's something said before. So we're referring back to and describing something that was mentioned before. We're referring back to the subject. Jeremy is my teacher. My teacher would then be the predicate. The dog is smart. That's the predicate of that sentence because we are describing something that was mentioned before. Any questions on these basic parts of a sentence? Okay, there's no tests, but I will hope that you will maybe go back to this slide and review these things if you are wondering what these different parts of speech are and how we're using this. These are kind of the main ones. We're going to go to the second page, which are the other stuff that we probably already know some of these. We have adjective, which describes a noun, something like instinctive or green or tough. We have an adverb, which is describing how a verb is done, and there's a big caution flag around adverbs. Most of the time we can get away with a stronger verb or stronger nouns to avoid adverbs. So when you can avoid adverbs, try to do that. We have pronouns, which are going to stand in place of a noun, so something like he, she, they, or it. Articles are going to define the specificity of a noun. There's only a couple articles, the, a, or an, really. Conjunctions are going to join sentences together, clauses or words together, things like and, but, or although. We have prepositions, which are going to be linking nouns, pronouns, or phrases to other words within a sentence, something like to or on or beside, anything that's like comparing two words in a sentence, between, as. Interjections are going to be things that a person might say out loud. It's almost like the narrator is speaking this. They might say something like "dang" or "good gracious" or anything where it's like a conversational phrase or something that somebody might just insert in their writing. Okay, so I think that we've all at least known or heard about or learned about a couple of these before. If you don't know exactly what all the conjunctions or pronouns are, these things like that, you're not going to get in huge trouble, but these are just the parts of speech, and we should try to understand our craft as best we can. The only ones I'm really going to get on your case about not knowing are these, though, which are subject, verb.
I have only one question about parts of speech.
Go ahead.
And my question is, using parts of speech in a novel or in any paragraph, is it good or bad? And if I want to use more parts of speech in my paragraph,
more passive speech? Is that what you're... Sorry. Go ahead.
If I use parts of speech in every paragraph, is it good or bad?
Are you saying passive speech? Like you're not... Yeah. It's not an active tense. We're writing in passive tense. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. There are occasionally times where you might want to use passive, but generally we want to stay as active as possible. Most sentences are going to be stronger in active tense. It's just easier for a reader to imagine things happening if they're in active tense. Now and again, you might want to use passive for some things. Like, passive would be, for instance, we would say instead of he played the game, we would say the game was played, right? Or we could say people use passive for all kinds of times where they might want to obfuscate or change or shift responsibility for who's doing something. We might say something like, I made a mistake. That's the active way. But if you want to maybe shift blame from yourself, you might say something like, mistakes were made, right? So that's an example of why you might want to use passive tense in a sentence or in a book. But you should, I guess, just do it with a deliberate intention in mind. We shouldn't just be doing it all the time for no reason. Try to just do it deliberately and with a strong purpose to it.
At maximum time, we don't care this type of parts of the speech, because when we are writing, in my case, going to write something, I never think about what type of parts of the speech I'm using, process or not, because if my audience don't understand my thing, then how I express my grammatical, because I have grammatical barrier, how I express it.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
My question is about parts of the speech. This type of speeches, if I use it in my paragraph or in my blog or anywhere, because I have a blog, if I use it, many of us in my audience, they don't understand this. So how I use this grammatical thing too easy for them?
How do you make your writing easier to understand?
Yeah.
Well, I'm still not 100% sure I'm grasping what you're asking, but all I can say is that in general, I think you're asking about passive writing, right? Like passive voice, I think is what you're asking about. You can mix it up. You can use a combination of both in any form of writing, whether it's a blog, whether it's a book, whether it's an article. But in general, the strongest prose is going to be reflected in active writing instead of passive. Passive is going to be used just in very specific cases where we want to sort of like remove the emphasis from the subject, the performer of the action, and we're emphasizing the action itself. So, for instance, I mentioned like mistakes were made. We're emphasizing the idea that we're removing the subject from that sentence, from the emphasis of that sentence. So that's just like one example of how you might do that. I'm not sure how else to answer like what exactly you're asking, but I hope that I've at least given you something there to use.
A little bit.
Okay. Sorry about that. Maybe you feel free to explain in the text chat. Maybe it would be easier to write out the question and then I can answer in a more complete way. If you use the, just click on the classroom chat and type whatever you want. I'll check back in a few minutes. Okay. So let's see. I was tagged in a comment here in the chat. So Gookie07 says, it's hard work, be it later part of our lives, because C's don't matter then as they were in our juvenile days when it was more peer pressure than anything else. Commonality there. Thanks. Expressing the ditto feelings I had back then. This was a few minutes ago, so I'm actually not sure exactly what you're referring to at this point, but glad you enjoyed whatever it is that I said before.
That was about grades, when you were talking about how you got C's back in school.
Okay, maybe that's it. Yeah, I got a lot of C's back in school, back in 8th grade. Not a great year, but I got an A+ in AP English in 12th grade, so I swung back. I brought it back.
But that doesn't matter, right? Later point, it's about hard work.
Yeah, grades. I mean, no one has ever asked for my grades later in life. So at the end of the day,
yeah,
you don't need a degree. True. You don't need grades to be a writer. Don't worry. Okay. Where are we? So parts of speech. I hope that we at least understand the main ones here. Subject, verb, direct object are the ones that you should really know. Predicate is kind of a newer one to some people, but try to just understand what this is. Refers back to something that was mentioned earlier in the sentence. Okay, so more prose principles. We want to replace longer words with shorter, simpler ones. We want to split longer sentences into shorter sentences, breaking denser paragraphs into 2 or 3 shorter paragraphs. We want to be varying our sentence length to create this sense of rhythm on the page. We want to not forget about character voice, especially in narrative writing like novels. You might imagine that your character themselves is the one who's writing the story if they're writing in first person, or it might sort of feel like if we're in a close third-person perspective around them, it may sort of feel like they're the one who's writing the third-person action description as well. So we can keep even a third-person description voice, or even a third-person voice, can very much evoke that character and feel like it is colored by that character. It is informed by that character in some way. We'll talk more about that in just a minute when we get to tense. I think we should just maybe read some more paragraphs first. And I want to look at guiding idea. We should be reading for the guiding idea, remembering that sometimes it's explained, it is stated very explicitly. We know exactly what the guiding idea is because the sentence maybe starts by telling it to us. And then sometimes it will not be explicitly stated. We have to kind of piece together. And it's not always difficult, but it may just not say directly what that idea is. But how does each sentence go on to sort of build a case for this idea and support it with example after example? So let's look at some more paragraphs. All right, I have a sentence or a paragraph from Dislocation Space by Garth Nix here, which was one of my example suggestions for novelettes to read for today. Let's read it out loud. I have it up on the screen on our slideshow so you can follow along if you'd like. 2 guards brought the woman in. That was the rule with this particular prisoner. Tough Siberian men, each twice her size and weight, but even so they kept their distance and held their plated leather goads ready, and watched the woman as if she was something swift and venomous. They did not have their submachine guns or pistols, because that was another rule with this prisoner. She was never allowed to be within a dozen paces of a firearm. All right, what's the idea behind this paragraph? What's the point? How can we express what this is saying in one sentence?
The guards are afraid of this prisoner.
That's true. Yep, the guards are afraid of her. So we're describing a person by sort of describing something around them, right? We're describing not the person themselves, but people's reactions to her. So what are we saying about the woman herself?
She's dangerous.
She's dangerous. Yes, exactly. So that's what I think that's more the guiding idea than the guards are afraid of her. The guards being afraid of her, that's a detail to support that guiding idea. Wouldn't you agree?
And this is actually, this is the best example of show don't tell, right? Because they could have said 2 guards brought in a woman that's who they feared because she's dangerous, right? Like,
exactly. 2 guards brought the dangerous woman in. We could have had that could have been the entire thing, right? But we need to give examples. That's the guiding idea. Then we each remember, what was the big rule that we wrote down? A paragraph encompasses one thought that is divided into sentences which address and advance that thought. So if the idea is this lady is dangerous, then each of these sentences is going to be an example that proves to us that she is dangerous, that sort of shows it to us by the way the guards treat her, by noting that no one's allowed to bring a gun within 12 paces of her, by saying they watch her as if she's something poisonous, like a snake that's coiled up. Like, all of these are examples of, demonstrations to us that she is in fact dangerous. Any questions on this guiding idea principle? We'll do a few more of these.
I was gonna say she's like Trinity in the Matrix.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that. Okay.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's do a little bit on tense and POV, and we'll do a few more paragraphs with guiding ideas. I'm going to mostly just keep the browser on the text because there's a lot of text to read today, and we have plenty to get through. So let's talk tense and POV. What is tense and POV? Each story is going to be written in a certain voice and in a certain sort of temporal space where we say, we're pretending like this happened either in the past, or we're pretending like this is happening right now. Those are sort of the options. You might have a future tense if you really, really want to. We see that in some limited examples. There's some like very strange stories that might use future tense sometimes, like Arrival uses this, and we see some odd deviations. But for the most part, stories happen now or they happened in the past, right? And that's going to be present tense or past tense. First person is saying the main character is the one who's telling the story, and most of the time it is the protagonist who is the sort of person speaking. There's the occasional odd example like The Great Gatsby where sort of the protagonist is somebody else, but we get the idea that usually the hero is the one telling the story, reporting the story to us, the audience. They might be directly addressing us as if we are a reader, or they might be addressing us as if we are a different character in the world, which is kind of the epistolary variation on this. Epistolary coming from Latin epistola, meaning letters. Epistolary books are things like Frankenstein or Dracula, which are almost entirely written in the form of letters going back and forth between 2 characters or more. We see modern versions of this that might be, blog posts or tweets or anything along those lines, but it's just like what we might call an in-universe artifact. They're saying this book exists within the world of this story as well. So Sherlock Holmes, the same sort of thing. Sherlock Holmes books are like, Watson's journal, essentially. So you can have multiple first-person narrators, but this can get confusing easily, especially once you go over one or two of these. Or like, I think this would probably max out around 3 different characters you can have saying, I did this, I did that, before we start getting a little weirded out by that. This first person is super common in YA books because there's less of what we call psychic distance between the character and the reader in this genre. Psychic distance is this principle of like how far removed are emotionally from imagining that you are that person. Like the more psychic distance that we have, and you're going to have a kind of cold effect where we don't really feel like we are immersing ourselves in that person's world and like putting ourselves in their shoes. Closer psychic distance would be something like, first person, we are them. They're saying, I did this, I did that, where we are just being sort of, more connected with the character. You can do it either way for different reasons, different effects. First person present is really common in YA, where it will be the character saying, I do this, I do that, as if there's almost like this, they are telepathically communicating the story to us as it happens to them in the moment. So it might even have moments where they're starting to narrate and they're like, oof, they like get punched in the stomach in the middle of trying to tell us something, and they might actually be able to get interrupted in that way. So it might be really, really, really immediate. And present tense in general just has that feeling of immediacy to it, which can lead to a lot more kind of tension and suspense and involvement, and it feels like we're there. So it's really useful for things like thrillers, really kind of gripping thriller-paced books, or books where we just want to feel like we're in the moment a lot more. Past tense is going to be better for stories that it adds like a certain air of authenticity to what we're saying, because it's like it really happened, it's in the past, and some feel as if it's a little more kind of authentic as a storytelling style for that reason. But you can go either way. You can do present tense or past tense for any kind of story. Finishing off first person, some consider first person to be the most natural way to tell a story too, especially in past tense, because we have, again, that very close psychic distance to the character, and also this is how we would tell a story of something that happened to us. We would say, I went to the bank and I saw my friend there. So some find this just to be the most natural type of storytelling there is. Variations might include epistolary or different forms of like narrator styles, where we might have the narrator be a character that's actively involved in the story, or one might be a narrator character that's uncovering the story and giving their own sort of commentary on it, or it might be a character that is changing the details to make themselves look better, and we're using a kind of unreliable narration. These are all just different options and different things that first person allows you to do. This is really good if you have a strong character voice, a character with an interesting perspective on the world, or a different way of thinking or talking, or just some kind of unique view on things. First person can be very useful for that kind of stuff. Also, it becomes very easy to just skip around to different memories in that person's life, because if a person says, I remember when I did this, or I remember when I did that, it doesn't take you out of the narrative as much as a flashback in a third person book does.
Okay.
All right, any questions on first person? Is anyone considering writing their book in first person?
Biography.
An autobiography?
Yeah, well, both. An auto and we're doing our grandmother, my cousin and I. She's going to be, the main character, her life, and then we'll do a chapter of ours. But I don't want to repeat it, so I'm starting another book because that's personal and it's not ready to be released.
I see.
I just started it a year and a half. So now I'm starting one and writing about Florida. Since I'm born and raised, I know it's very important to be true to your facts and locations and all that. And I've been here all my life, so I know it well. I'm just involved in too many things that requires a lot of research. That's a lot easier. I know names of everything, places, restaurants. So I want to be as true to the fact as possible. So that's my story.
Great. Okay. So yeah, maybe it could be some good opportunities for using first-person voice in those. There's also times where you're sort of speaking as yourself, but you are telling a story about somebody else. in which case you get a little bit of room to, you can use your own commentary or your own opinions and just include those as part of the text, because if you yourself are the narrator, then you can, it just gives you room to do some fascinating things.
The only thing I need to learn or know about, I still have some characters, my family is still alive.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about how we're approaching it is mental illness and evil. And we had a lot of that in our family. So, you know, you have to be very careful. We may get a ghostwriter to protect us, you know, and still be able to tell our story, you know, of the abuse. So, anyway, and part of all our family is based on being gay. And that's the whole history. And the author, my cousin, is gay, and he was abused from the time he was 4 years old. So, it's very delicate, you know, when you're talking about your life and accusing your family of being a monster, and it's my word against yours, you know.
Sure, yeah, you gotta be really careful with this.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to get an editor and then maybe a ghostwriter. So we'll see.
Right.
We haven't gotten to that point yet.
Sure. Yeah, there's a couple options there when you're talking real life and people that are still alive, especially really delicate topics like that. Some people change all the names and they just say that this is like a fictional story that was inspired by real life. Some people might try to actually really go the extra mile and contact everyone that you're writing about and get their clearance and get their okay with it. There's different styles here. I can't exactly help with this because this is just more of a fiction-focused class, but I would definitely do your research on this, and especially in, like, from state to state, I think that laws on public record and stuff are different, so I would just be careful, be cautious, and do your homework there, but I'm sure you were going to, so you're all set.
Thank you.
But you got to write the book. Yeah, got to focus on the writing first, so we'll really focus on these things, these nuts and bolts, before we get to the publishing stages.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions about first person? Anyone think they want to write in first person? Let me check the chat here. Javon says both first and third. Oh, go ahead, Nacho.
Just going to say mine is also first.
Okay, and what kind of voice are you using for this? Who's the narrator character?
So primarily the protagonist, but I will have some chapters with a different point of view.
Okay, cool. So
a
skipping
different
around.
character, switching. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Yep, you can totally do that. And sometimes in the sort of Game of Thrones style, which I know that Nacho is a big fan of, it will just tell us the name of the character that we are changing to their perspective, and each chapter is just essentially their name right at the top of it. You don't have to do that though, and you can, but usually you'll just want to, in the first paragraph or two, clue us in as to whose point of view we're in, like, as soon as possible. Yeah, I love first person. I've been writing mostly in first person in my last couple books, so this is super fun and just allows you to, if you have a fun character voice that you're just good at, like if you have a D&D character that you always play, or you have some a favorite actor from when you were a kid or something like that you can just imitate their sort of voice or style very well, this just makes this a lot easier. So it's nice if you have just if you're using first person to emphasize and amplify a character voice. Okay, let's look at some other styles and some other choices. So we have second person. This would be you, so direct address to the reader. This is really, really, really rarely done. This is pretty much only used in video game or role-playing game writing, or choose your own adventure books, and some more experimental or literary fiction. Generally, you shouldn't do this unless you're using it for some really, really specific reason. So unless you are, then just don't choose this one. And then we have third, which is really common and really versatile. This is he, she, third person. We are outside of the head, and we are looking at things from or a limited point of view. This is very versatile and allows you to do a lot of different stuff. Omniscient is really rare these days, but this is books where the narrator kind of knows everything and can access any of the character's thoughts or emotions at any time. Very, very infrequently done, but you would see more of this in, This used to be more the norm a long time ago, but nowadays, limited is going to be the sort of expectation where the narrator can only access thoughts and emotions of one central character at a time, often separated by section into chapter breaks. So sometimes this will just be separated by paragraph breaks, So like I mentioned Game of Thrones, where every chapter has a person's name on it, and we are only in that person's point of view in that chapter. The voice of the book doesn't tell us anything that character doesn't know, and it sort of filters what we're explaining and describing through that character's experience, right? So you can give us a description of a room that is in third person, and we're saying like Joe walks into the trailer park, and then we might just sort of tailor that description to things that he himself would notice, right? So we might say Joe walks into the trailer park and he notices all the deadly weapons within 5 feet of him. He noticed the rake with its sharp point. He noticed the spade. He noticed the rifle on the wall. He noticed the knife. And in that same way, we can sort of, you imagine. I find it helpful to imagine that the character themselves is writing the third-person story. So in that way, it's filtered through what they would notice, what they would pay attention to, what they would find interesting. Omniscient is more, it lends to a sort of more either historical or fairy tale kind of storytelling sometimes, where it feels like you're a historian who has all the facts and who's done all the research and who knows both sides of the story, and you are just asserting a sort of more comprehensive author knowledge of everything that goes on. It can still be used to create tension and to create any of the effects that a limited story would have. But in Omniscient, for instance, you will run into trouble in certain cases where it's like one of your characters is planning to betray all the other characters. Well, the fact that you didn't tell us about that might sort of feel cheap in an Omniscient story. It might sort of feel like a cheap tactic to create suspense, because it's like, if you know everything, why didn't you tell us about that thing that was going on? So you'll sometimes run into some issues there. But generally, I would say if you don't know what else to choose, go with first person or third person limited. Is anyone thinking of using this style, or have any questions or comments about third person?
I'm trying to use it, but I'm so accustomed to first person that it's really hard making that transition. I think I was telling you guys that earlier.
Yeah, this can be tough if you're really used to one thing or the other, and switching back and forth, especially in the same story, can just jumble up in your brain.
Now, screenplays, though, are all third person, right?
So... Yeah, screenplays are in their own sort of mini format, which is called third person present tense cinematic. In cinematic style, you're not in anyone's head, but there's a kind of camera. There's like a physical, well, it's not physical, there's an imaginary camera that we have to kind of pretend that there's an audience that's seeing it through only that lens of that camera. There are some books that are written this way. It's really rare, but you'll see some books written in cinematic. And in cinematic style, we also have, what's the other big difference? We can't access the character's thoughts. So it's a lot of psychic distance, right? A ton of psychic distance from the characters. Go ahead.
I was talking to my friend last night about, it's about show, don't tell in scripts. And she's like, well, that's the same thing in novels. And I was like, well, that's true. Like the example you read from that story, right? Rather than saying she's a dangerous woman and the guards were scared of her, they show how the guards are reacting, and then we feel that she's dangerous. And I'm reading Sin and Syntax, like Nacho had recommended, and I just literally covered that chapter today where they talked about, we want the reader to come to that conclusion. We want them to feel that she's dangerous, and that's what is so important about it, is the narrator comes to that decision. But with cinematic, it's like another level of show don't tell, right? This is a whole different, like I was like, it's almost like a different category of show don't tell, because you're literally visually showing. You can't say anything about what they're thinking or anything really that's off screen. So
yeah, I
don't know if you've had that where you're like, wait a minute, there are almost two types of it.
That's a great point. Yeah, absolutely. This principle of showing and not telling, it looks a little different in books and scripts, but the same sort of ideas are there. And I will say, in books you have a little more room for telling, and sometimes telling can be totally fine in a book, much more so in a script. But yeah, definitely pay attention to this paradigm and this the contrast between showing and telling in those different mediums, because it does work in slightly different ways. We will definitely talk more about this throughout the whole class. Any other comments, questions on any of these tenses? Alien Voices, I have an idea for an omniscient story. Go ahead.
Yeah. It was this idea where it's pretty much you follow different characters and their different and their professional and personal life. That was my idea for this one story that I had
Okay.
because it has like a lot of characters in it.
And why did you think this would be best told in omniscient style?
Because as it says, the omniscient style is like getting to like the characters' thoughts and emotions. So if you're like talking to one character, there's this other character has this thoughts with him. I
Okay.
just feel like
I think I
this
see.
felt appropriate. I just felt like this felt appropriate since I have this like large cast of characters in it.
Okay, so you wanted to be able to easily jump from character to character without jarring the audience too much.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I could see that definitely. So yeah, there's always going to be some stories that might they might be amplified to some extent by telling them in the omniscient style. You should generally do so if you have that really specific idea of how it will help you or how it will make your story more effective. I wouldn't choose it for no reason, but if you feel that this is the best way to tell your story, then maybe it is. All right, let's keep going. So let's talk vocabulary. And let's look at what Stephen King says about vocabulary in his great book, which is called On Writing. So, what does he say? Put your vocabulary on the top shelf of your toolbox and don't make any conscious effort to improve it. You'll be doing that as you read, but that comes later. One of the really bad things you can do to your writing is to dress up the vocabulary, looking for long words because you're ashamed of the short ones. This is like dressing up a household pet in evening clothes. The pet is embarrassed, and the person who committed this act of premeditated cuteness should be even more embarrassed. Make yourself a solemn promise right now. You will never use emolument when you mean tip, and you'll never say John stopped long enough to perform an act of excretion when you meant John stopped long enough to take a shit. I'm not trying to get you to talk dirty, only plain and direct. Remember that the basic rule of vocabulary is use the first word that comes to your mind if it is appropriate and colorful. If you hesitate and cogitate, you will come up with another word. Of course you will, there's always another word. But it probably won't be as good as your first one or as close to what you really mean. Questions on this?
That is almost the exact opposite of what I just read, in that they're about like finding a better word for something, but it's saying simple, don't use complicated words, but they're like the first words you come to describe something are not going to be as powerful as when you find that perfect noun or verb that really says what you're saying in a simpler way. Or I don't know.
That sounds like editing to me, though, doesn't it? That sounds more like a second draft kind of thing than it does the first pass. There are just a lot of different philosophies and approaches to this. Like, not everyone's going to suggest doing this in the same way. But to me, on a first draft, I think this pretty much makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. Like, and you may find in editing that you need to go back and change, like maybe a lot of the words just don't work for some reason. But you may actually also be surprised how much just works fine with the first word that came to your head. And you should, I guess, just try to not overthink this too much to the point where it slows you down, or you find yourself not expressing a thought or an idea just because you're like, it sounds too basic. What was the book that you were reading that from, by the way? Was that the one that Nacho linked in the chat?
This is, Sin and Sin. It was just talking about people being lazy and using like that, I don't know, just that. I think really what it is when you're like, maybe Stephen King as an expert writer, sure, that makes sense. But if you're a beginner writer, the words you're going to come up with are potentially going to be really flat, boring, generic words. And so with my, there's a better way to say house, right? Is it a cottage? Is it a something, right? That's what, it's a whole different, it's like coming at it from a different extreme, right? There's a better word that a noun could replace 3 adjectives if you find the right noun, right? And and it depends on the pacing and the feeling you're trying. But the point was just that I think it's more for a beginner writer. We're gonna, our default may be cliches and really overused words. And I think his Stephen King's advice sounds like it's good for someone who maybe already is sort of a writer. I don't know if that, it kind of depends on which extreme you're in. I think it's like his is like, don't go too far this way, and the book I'm reading is like, if your immediate, words are these dry sort of plain words, that might, think about it a little more. I don't know.
You can try to just find your own whatever, like everyone's going to tell you different advice and different stuff like that, so you might as well just try to find what works for you, what makes sense for you, and maybe try to use this to guide your own improvement. You don't have to take literally everything from any one source or any one book or any one class, including this one. But I in terms of this just this advice here, my general thought would be, in your first draft, just don't get hung up on words. Just choose the first words that come to your mind, and then when you come back and you're actually editing and cleaning things up, then you may find that there are better words that might have worked before. But the more you do this, the more you will find yourself gravitating towards the right words the first time. It just takes repetition in order to get to the point where you're kind of doing that, I guess. I mean, when he first started, I imagine his initial first words were probably pretty bad too when he was first getting going. So I think it's just going to come down to that practice. Thank you for the comments. Go ahead.
I was writing something the other day, and the most common word that came to my mind first was remnants, but I chose to use the word vestiges, and I think that it sounds so much better. It's more, I think it's more of a sophisticated, it fits more with the voice in this work, I think. So I think it just depends, right?
Sure. Yeah, no, if you have an idea for a better word to use, then you absolutely should.
Okay.
Let's look at some examples of how vocabulary can be used to express a simple thought in a simple way, or a simple thought in a complex way. This is sort of going back to, I guess this ties nicely into what we're talking about here. You have some of these styles that are using just incredibly basic words to tell really big ideas in these sentences, and sometimes we have the opposite case where it's like just one basic essential idea that the author has just, in their personal style, they have decided to use very complicated words and sentence structures to explore. Let's look at both. First, we're going to look at Paragraph from The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which is a Pulitzer Prize-winning book. Who wants to read this out loud? Any volunteers?
I'll read it.
Go ahead.
All right. An hour later, they were on the road. He pushed the cart, and both he and the boy carried knapsacks. In the knapsacks were essential things, in case they had to abandon the cart and make a run for it. Clamped to the handle of the cart was a chrome motorcycle mirror that he used to watch the road behind them. He shifted the pack higher on his shoulders and looked over the wasted country. The road was empty. Below, in the little valley, the still gray serpentine of a river, motionless and precise. Along the shore, a burden of dead reeds. "Are you okay?" he said. The boy nodded. Then they set out along the blacktop in the gunmetal light, shuffling through the ash, each the other's world entire. Wow, that was great.
Nice, right? Simple words, though, for the most part. A couple fancy $10 words there.
Yeah, there was a few, serpentine of a river. There was a few, but just like you're right, but there was a rhythm to it, and it was like, in case they hadn't abandoned the cart, like there's a mystery, right? It's not like they're just walking down the road. There was like, it was simple, but there's something going on.
There's a lot, simple, but there's a lot there at the same time.
Yeah.
Any other comments on this? What do you guys notice about this very simple idea? And what do you think is the guiding idea behind the paragraph? What are we trying to express here?
I mean, we're getting a sense of two people in a vast, quiet area that are on the run from something. It's kind of the basics I walked away with.
Is this the very first lines of the book?
I don't know. I don't remember. I don't think it is, but it's close. It's in the first couple chapters. Or are there even chapters in this book? This book is super small, so I don't really remember. I read this
It
a
would
long,
be a
long time ago.
fantastic opening. It's just like, boom, wow.
It's probably pretty
Yeah.
similar. Have you guys read this book? This
Yeah.
book is awesome. Like,
Yeah,
if you
I love
haven't
it.
read this
Love it.
before, this
Yeah,
is so
it's
good. And
one
you
of
can
my
read it in
favorite.
one sitting. I mean, it's a little exhausting, but you can totally read it in one sitting. So here's how I see the guiding idea. The boy and the dad are having a rough time of surviving in the wasteland, and they deeply need each other. That's pretty much it, right? It's a pretty simple idea. The boy nodded. They set out along the blacktop in the gunmetal light, shuffling through the ash, each the other's world entire. And so this is one of those examples where the last sentence is sort of the point, right? And then we can look back up at the paragraph and see how each of these sentences supported that idea. So each of these sentences is advancing the thought that this is a dangerous area. They had only essentials packed in case they needed to run. Okay, so we're learning this is treacherous. They're in an area where they have to remain watchful, or else they might get caught. They might get hurt. We're seeing he has a mirror that he uses to watch the road behind them. Each of these sentences expresses the concept: dangerous area, dad and kid need each other. But it doesn't mean we have to use very fancy words. We can express that all in very simple, I almost want to say basic sentences. There's nothing in the vocabulary that needs to show off or like blow anyone's mind. Let's look at another example. So I want to talk about, let's look at what did we say we're going to do? A simple idea expressed in a simple way. So this is simple idea expressed in a simple way. Now let's look at simple idea expressed in a very complex way. Let's look at a passage from The Horror at Red Hook by H.P. Lovecraft. And this is sort of about a guy who, I'm just going to maybe cue you in on what the guiding idea here is, just so you know what you're reading. But this is about a guy who, when he becomes poor and depressed, he becomes fascinated with morbid stuff. Let's read this. Does anyone want to read this really dense paragraph of 1920s horror writing?
Sure, I'll read it.
Go ahead, Nacho.
Let me see. It's kind of hard to read with your head.
Oh, sorry. Am I in the way? Forgot to block it. There we go.
In youth, he had felt the hidden beauty and ecstasy of things, and had been a poet. But poverty and sorrow and exile had turned his gaze in darker directions, and he had thrilled at the imputations of evil world around. Daily life had for him come to be phantasmagoria of macabre shadow studies, now glittering, leering with concealed rottenness. He would often regard it as merciful that most persons of high intelligence jeer the inmost mysteries. For, he argued, if superior minds were ever placed close to contact with the secrets preserved by ancient and lowly cults, the resultant abnormalities would soon not only wreck the world, but threaten the very integrity of the universe. All this reflection was no doubt morbid, but keen logic and a deep sense of humor ably offset it. Malone was satisfied to let his notions remain as half-spied and forbidden visions to be lightly played with. Hysteria came only when duty flung him into a hell of revelation, too sudden and insidious to escape.
All right, thank you, Nacho. Very spooky. This is a much more complicated paragraph than our last one. Or I think I even had to truncate the middle of this to make this all fit on one slide. And again, what are we actually even saying here? When this guy became poor and depressed, he became fascinated with morbid stuff and took an interest in dark, ancient secrets. So this is an antiquated style. Very few people write like this. Even back then, very few people wrote exactly like this. But this is sort of part of why people love Lovecraft so much. The kind of really arcane, academic, ancient writing that feels like you're sort of leafing through a tome of forbidden lore. And we can see how you would have been able to write this in a very much more direct and simple way. But this is just part of his style. This is like, all of his writing is like this. He could be talking about making eggs in the morning, and he would start talking about the resultant abnormalities of long-forgotten aeons and stuff like that. So this is just part of why people love this. And so lean into the style and the voice that just comes naturally to you. If you lean into it hard enough, it just becomes your style. It doesn't become flaws as much as it becomes just like your voice. So I hope that by sharing these...
The last sentence was really insightful. Like, the hysteria came only when duty flung him into a hell of revelation, too sudden and insidious to escape. I mean, basically, that's essentially the psychological description of what the snowball effect is. When things start, you know, when a snowball starts getting fast and you can't stop it, and you need to stop emotional, you know, breakdowns early. And so that's essentially a way of describing that a little bit, and it's just so interesting way, and you feel it. It adds so much feeling to a potentially simple concept too. I like it.
These are great pair of paragraphs to look at, right? Like, you know, the one from the road and this one. I think one thing that's kind of cool is, like, you mention sometimes about, you know, nouns kind of build the world for us, right? And it's like you could just say what he, you know, the just get to the main point of what you're talking about, but the style, all these kind of strange words are building this, you know, dark world of this story, right? Like a phantasmagoria. I have no idea what a phantasmagoria of Cobb's Shadow Studies is, but it sounds like, oh, something really dark and, you know, like gory and, you know, whatever. Like, right, like, I mean, all these little words, even if we don't understand them, they work. Like, they help us imagine this kind of concealed, rotten world or something, right?
Yeah, I love that. Great analysis of that. The vocabulary that you choose all throughout the story helps create the mood and the vibe of it. Like, you can describe something, and you see this a lot in reading horror books, because horror books, nowadays especially, the pacing that they use, nothing really scary. Like, there's sometimes a scary scene at the very beginning, but then there's nothing scary for like 70, 80 pages. But the way that they describe everything, it feels like a horror novel. Like, they'll describe the death gray light as it filters through the pine trees, and it, like, a doll lying in the puddle in the front of the yard like a drowned corpse. Like, just the things that they choose to focus on and the words that they use to describe those things create the feeling of that genre, regardless of what you're actually even describing. And that's one of the things that makes books really special and different than scripts, is that in scripts, you don't really get to do this the same way. Just what we say is what we see. You aren't always getting to use the words in the same way to create the feeling of, like, reading a Lovecraft story often feels like we're reading the journal of someone who went slowly insane, and so it feels like you yourself are kind of going slowly insane. And that's just one of these sort of experiences that only books can really give you.
My favorite words used here is imputations, and he seems to be saying that these are evils that are never held to account as well. And so I think that adds to the inherent wickedness of what he's saying.
Yeah,
I kind of like this.
If you like this, you'll probably like the rest of his work. I mean, it's all like this. So this is mostly about stories about people who they have a curiosity to look beyond the veil of things that we can see and hear, and maybe they try to access another world, or they become suspicious of the nature of our reality, and they start to dig into ancient arcane secrets to learn that, you know, the world is very different than we think. There are shadowy forces manipulating everything, and there's monsters everywhere, and there's, like, you know, ancient space creatures that are intending to destroy the earth and everything on it, like we're just bugs on their shoes or whatever. So yeah, this is the whole Lovecraft genre, that he essentially created this genre of cosmic horror based on being terrified of everything.
One other thing about this is, like, he's making a really interesting proposal here that that these secrets can only be seen by like the lowly people, and that superior minds, high intelligent people can't actually access them, and if they did, you know, the world would blow up, basically.
Exactly. Yes.
And
Yes.
it's a very interesting claim he's making, and it's like, whoa, he says a lot in this.
Exactly, and this is a big theme throughout Lovecraft stories, is that he's saying that if the intelligence, the academics and scientists didn't turn their nose up, like, it's a good thing they turned their nose up at what, you know, ancient cults and ancient religions were trying to study, because if science could bridge that gap and like learn how to work with those ancient forces, we'd be screwed. So yeah, that's like a big theme throughout all of his work. It's pretty neat. What does he say? The most merciful thing in the world is the inability of the human mind to correlate all of its contents. Like, if we could understand everything we know at once, we would go insane, is sort of what he says.
I like that. That reminds me of the one quote by Einstein that says, "Time is what prevents everything from happening all at once."
Oh, that is cool.
Isn't that a cool way to look at it? I love that.
That's great.
I like that.
Let's keep going. So let's look at one more example. We have a complex idea expressed with brevity and precision in For He Can Creep by Siobhan Carroll. And I want you to pay attention in this one to how we express what would be like a multi-million-dollar scene in a movie in just like 3 sentences. We just get right to the point. We use so few words to express something so deeply visual. But it allows your mind to do a lot of the CGI and the heavy lifting, and the like. Your imagination is the CGI budget in a book, right? So instead of having to use computer effects, your mind fills in the gaps and sort of like builds out the whole world around it. Who wants to read? Amanda, you did such a great job reading before. Do you want to read one more?
Sure. I remember this scene and I got confused, so I'm glad we're reading it. Jeffrey trots at the devil's heels down the madhouse stairs, past the mouse's nest on the landing, past the kitchen with its pleasant smell of bread and pork fat, through the asylum's heavy door, which stands mysteriously open, and onto roads of darkness, beneath which the round orb of earth hangs like a jewel. Jeffrey gazes with interest up at the blue glow of the crystalline filament, at the fixed stars, and at the golden chain of heaven from which all the universe is suspended. He feels hungry. Well, the devil says presently, let's get the formalities out of the way. He snaps his fingers. Instantly, Jeffrey is dangling above the earth, staring down at it as one does at a patterned carpet. He can see the gleaming rooftop of the madhouse and Bethnal Green and the darkened streets of London, still bustling even at this time of night.
All right, so we just went from an insane asylum to roads of darkness beneath the earth, in one, like, within the same sentence. Very just complex ideas expressed with brevity and precision here in these paragraphs here. Let's go through what's happening here. So Joffrey is a cat, by the way. If anyone did not read this one. The devil is taking Joffrey out of the insane asylum where he lives, and he's going to show him something somewhere else in the world. So he takes him into this kind of interdimensional space. He takes him into outer space above the earth, essentially, and then sort of zooms around to a different place on the earth to show him something in London. So some terms that may be helpful to know here are the firmament with a capital F is a sort of antiquated Victorian and pre-Victorian way of referring to just the heavens. Like, the crystalline firmament is just referring to the idea of the stars in the sky. The golden chain of heaven is referring to just the galaxy of the Milky Way. And he's using words that the cat would use, the cat would know, and the culture that he comes from to express what's going on here, which is why he doesn't say, I could see the Milky Way galaxy up above. He says, the golden chain of heaven from which the universe is suspended. Okay, so anything that we notice or want to comment on in these paragraphs here from this fantasy story?
Now I get it.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, I was just going to say, now I understand what the views were. I think I figured out, but first it's like a big view of the Earth in the context of the galaxies, basically, you know, hanging like a jewel in this big galaxy. Mm-hmm. And then he brings them around with a bird's eye view to a part on the Earth. So
Yeah.
that I just didn't get that, but that's it. I mean, I kind of figured it out, but now I really get it.
I see. Okay. Yeah, sometimes it just takes, if it's an unusual type of image or something like that, it can help sometimes to read it out loud or to read it again. And sometimes it's okay. It's always totally fine if you are not able to visualize what the author meant for whatever reason, as long as we can kind of identify why. Did this make sense to everyone else? Carmen, did you have a comment?
Reminds me of the way Jesus was interacting with the devil. I guess it could be said that way. It almost seems like the cat is being taken on this path, kind of like the way the devil did with Jesus in the Gospels, at least the book of Matthew. I know that.
He takes him on a little tour.
Well, not like a tour, but he shows him the kingdoms and tempts him.
Oh,
and,
yeah, it's just like that.
Yes, and the bread is present, the idea of bread, because he had been fasting. And also the word firmament is found in the book of Psalms. So a lot of this reminds me a lot of biblical writings. It's really interesting. I did start reading this the other day when you suggested it, but I didn't get through it yet.
The author is a professor of English history, I believe, in the South, I think in Georgia, and she writes in a style that intends to evoke the writing of the time, which writing in the 17 and 1800s used a lot of allusions to biblical and mythological references. So her work has a lot of that because it's supposed to kind of feel like, oh, this is of that time.
Great, I like it.
Mm-hmm. It's also just super easy to read and get into. Also, like the opening paragraphs are just like just pull you right in, and the cats are just great characters. The Joffrey in particular, the hero of this one. And after this, the devil gives him a bunch of food as well. He's like wants to get favors from Joffrey, so he gives him a big feast. So very tempting, the devil temptation thing. All right, let's continue a little bit. Oh, go ahead.
The cat, he's a demon slayer, isn't he?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, he defends he defends the inmates of the asylum that he lives in from devils and from demons, and Satan wants to sort of get his personal favorite human. So Satan has a plan to do that. It's great. Yeah, Siobhan Carroll, fantastic dark fantasy horror writer. You guys should read her. Okay, so we've talked a lot about Prose. I just want to see, do we have any questions, comments, or things that you guys would still like to know about Prose before we move on a little bit to premise for our last 20 minutes? Do we want to review our main things that we wrote down for today as kind of our key points? What was our number one point? Somebody read this out.
Well, I'm now going back.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'm now going back to all my paragraphs and looking at.
Go ahead, Carmen.
A paragraph should encompass. I can't see.
Sorry.
A paragraph should encompass one thought, an idea guiding it, divided into sentences which address and advance that idea.
Thank you. And then I have one more. What was my other kind of main thing to write down here? Where did I keep that? Or where did I put it? 1 second. Oh, it was at the very top. Here it is.
Will you be sharing this deck as well as the video?
Sure. Yeah, I always share the slideshows. Carmen, will you read this one up for us too? This is our other main point for today.
Writing principles. Use the active voice. Use concrete and specific language. Using these rules, you can even make a very simple description of a bathroom interesting.
Thank you for that. All right, so main 3 rules: active voice, concrete and specific language. A paragraph is one thought divided into sentences in which each sentence addresses and advances that idea. those are the main takeaways for today and the main things to know. Also, I hope you know what subject, verb, and direct object are at the very least, and you should look at the rest of these kind of parts of speech and points of grammatical note within the sentence, and just have an idea of how these work. All right, did anyone turn in a paragraph today for feedback to look at, or were you guys still working on these? We can also just do a lot of these next week if no one had finished one for today.
And I'll try to learn how to upload it or whatever it's called, because I don't know how to do it. So
that's
I'll
okay.
See,
do you want to maybe if you email it to me, I can just get it that way.
Oh, okay, I can do that.
Okay.
So where's your email?
It's it's going to be Conor@scriptcamp.net. Conor is spelled CONOR, just one single N. Conor@scriptcamp.net.
A script camp what?
.net.
Oh, .net. Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so the idea for today was that if you could, I know some folks came to the week 0 class yesterday, so didn't really have time to do this in time for today. But the idea was we would write some paragraphs, and you can either upload them to this Google Doc that I have if you want to do so anonymously, or I can just take a look at things if you email or message them to me. So let me open up our doc here and see if anyone has uploaded. Oh, great. Okay, so we have a few paragraphs. I'm just going to look at these pretty quickly and mark them up and just give some comments on them as we go. Throughout the class, we'll have plenty more time to get feedback on writing. I just wanted to get a general sense of what we were the writing styles of the students that we had today. Okay, so don't worry about unmuting and responding to questions for now. Just for the purposes of time, I'm just going to go through straight through all these. But let's take a look. So we have our first one, which is from Lightkeeper's Daughter by Amanda. And the idea behind this was you're going to write something brand new, not use a paragraph from something you've written before, because we want to get a good sense of where is your writing at now and today, given all the things you know, all the things you have learned. Okay, let's look at Lightkeeper's Daughter. So thanks for uploading this, Amanda. For being such an average child, Layla's home life was anything but average. Let me just make sure I am on here and it's in full screen. Okay. For being such an average child, Layla's home life was anything but average. When her mother was in one of her listless moods, she came to life as the Ice Queen, while Layla took on the identity of a mere peasant, unworthy of even a moment's glance. When angry, her mother transformed into a dragon, while Layla responded, not as the fair, innocent maiden in need of rescue, but as a twisted creature surely deserving of the fury being unleashed upon her. Alright, thank you for this. So a couple things, I will just point out a couple words that you can maybe consider cutting from this in order to still get the main effect you want. So a lot of these words of being, like we see right here, for being such an average child, I think we mean just for such an average child. So words that we can often examine cutting, being, or verbs of the form to be, the word just, even, things like that, just keep an eye out for those. Layla's home life was anything but average. When her mother was in one of her listless moods, she came to life as the Ice Queen, while Layla took on the identity of a mere peasant, unworthy of even a moment's glance. So took on the identity of a peasant took on the identity sounds like a way of saying became a mere peasant. So mom became the Ice Queen, Layla became a peasant. That to me, I think, expresses the idea just as well. Became a mere peasant, unworthy of even a moment's glance. A peasant unworthy of a moment's glance. Okay, so when angry, her mother transformed into a dragon, while Layla responded not as a fair, innocent maiden in need of rescue. Why? But the princess wouldn't respond to the dragon, right? So I'm a little lost in this last kind of sentence and simile here. Mother transformed into a dragon. Layla responded as a twisted creature, surely deserving, not of the fury, just deserving the fury.
It shouldn't be responded. It should just be take on the identity of or became, embodied, okay. Whatever. Yeah, you're right. It's not a response. I just was like, yeah, that wasn't the right.
Okay, maybe she felt like a twisted creature who, something like that. Maybe we can say she imagined herself as a twisted creature, something like that. So yeah, got a little lost in that last metaphor there. I like the general idea of this, and it has that nice sort of guiding idea behind it of this is going to describe why Layla's home life is not average, because her mom is sort of, I guess, bipolar a little bit, or at least has angry mood, has like, you know, severe mood swings. That's what I'm sort of getting from this. So I like the sort of two fantasy comparisons that we use. She becomes the Ice Queen or the dragon, so that's a nice way of keeping that in the kind of fantastical voice and mood. Thank you for this. Let's look at different. Is this the same? This is also by Amanda.
Yeah, you can skip it.
Okay, sounds good. I'd love to look at it later, but let's look at a few more different writers here. Okay, Javon has the Blood Moon's Cries for us. Let's take a look at that. And after we're done with these, we will talk premise just for about 10-15 minutes or so. And if you want to talk more premise, lab is at 4 today. All right, we have the first person paragraph here. Let's space this down a little bit. As I waited for Ralkin to join me, I saw a red orb in the middle of the desolate chamber. It hovered, pouring endless pools of blood from a fleshy chasm on top. It stretched and bulged slightly as though something was inside. If the myths and legends were true, then this must be it then. The Blood Moon lost its cosmic power and structure. It shrunk and shrunk until it was no bigger than an urn. There it floated in front of me. Its vicious, fleshy body beckons to me. Come, drink. Okay. This is certainly interesting. Weird flesh orbs and weird blood orbs, things like that. Cool stuff, but we're changing tenses in the middle. You see, we've gone from past tense to present tense. As I waited for Ralkin to join me, but at the end we say it beckons to me. Well, we would have to say it beckoned to me. We can't actually be swapping tense or breaking POV in that way. I saw a red orb in the middle of the desolate chamber. So a lot of the time we can assume that the main character is going to be seeing, thinking, and feeling the things that they are mentioning. So we can often cut words like I saw. We could say something like, as I waited for him to join me, a red orb rose in the middle of the desolate chamber. Something like that, which gives us a better sense of what is happening in the room. We understand that the character is seeing it. You don't always need to say, I saw this happen. I saw that happen next. It hovered, pouring endless pools of blood. Well, first of all, you don't pour a pool of blood. You pour, like, rivulets of blood. Believe me, I'm a horror writer. I know all about how blood works. Water falls into pools. It doesn't pour out in pool form. It pulls out in, like, liquids become a pool when they are on a surface. They are not a pool in the air. How do you know it's endless if it just started? I don't think we can really use the word endless here. So we would say, maybe just let's pick a stronger verb saying something like gouting blood from a fleshy chasm on top. I can't believe I'm saying these words in a class. It stretched and bulged. What stretched and bulged? The orb, I think you're saying? The orb stretched and bulged slightly as though something was inside. If the myths and legends were true, this must be it then. The Blood Moon, I guess, is an artifact that you're talking about. It lost its cosmic power and structure. This feels like it might not quite belong in the paragraph to me. This must be it then. The Blood Moon lost its cosmic power and structure. It shrunk and shrunk until it was no bigger than an urn. See, the weird thing to me is that it seems like it starts the paragraph where he doesn't know what this thing is, and then he sort of figures out what it is, and then he knows exactly what's happening here. So that was just, I think we need to walk us through that transition a little bit more sometimes. So if he's like, a red orb rode in the room, it bulged and there was something inside. I recognized it. It was the Blood Moon. Apparently it had lost its power because it should be huge right now, but then it shrunk. So maybe just walk us down that path of understanding what it is a little, or of the character coming to realize what this thing is. It shrunk and shrunk until it was no bigger than an urn. That sounds like it might even belong in a second paragraph to me. There it floated in front of me. Its vicious, fleshy body beckoned to me. How is it? Did you mean to say viscous? Or is it's just really vicious? What's vicious about it? Would just be my question. Vicious means like aggressive usually, like it's threatening in some way. A weird red orb of blood does not necessarily read as vicious to me, but maybe there's something vicious that you intended here. I like the quote, it ends with come drink. It's like a weird cursed artifact trying to turn this guy into a vampire or something. Anyway, cool imagery. Just maybe look at those points that I mentioned here, and always be trying to reduce words when possible. Try to take out these unnecessary filler words and always try to stay in the same tense throughout. Okay, let's see. Any more? We have one from Nacha. Thank you, Nacha. And let me see, did I emailed one as well? I might have to check my email over here. Okay, I have that from Esther. Let's look at Esther's paragraph. How how am I going to... This is a Word document, right? 1 second.
Control C and then Shift Control V.
Shift Control V? Okay. Thanks, Nacho. Okay, let's get this one here. Oh, that didn't work on Firefox for some reason. Okay, I think that worked. Alright, let's take a look. As I stand baffled in front of my 40-year-old son's room, the question I ask myself is, he really my son? Wait a minute, hang on. The question I ask myself, probably need like a colon there, is he really my son? I see scattered shoes thrown everywhere, pants draped over a CD tower, torn up plastic wrappings thrown in a box, and a bag of gym clothes dragging the floor. On top of the bed, there are multiple bags of open candy lined up on the edge of the bed. I think we referred to the bed twice here, so we generally don't want to repeat ourselves in a sentence. Here we're saying on top of the bed and also on the edge of the bed. Maybe just kind of pick one or the other. Torn up envelopes, an empty video game box, and receipts galore. When I walked up to the window, I see is that we're changing tenses. Again, in the middle of the paragraph, we're going from past tense to present tense, which we should generally try to avoid doing. I see 5 empty glasses lined up in a row and a couple of candy wrappers on the side of an overflowing trash can. When I scan the opposite side of the room, there stands a laundry basket tipped over with dirty clothes, also a couple of belts draped over the closet knobs, and finally a small piece of luggage blocked the closet door from closing instead of putting it back in the hall closet. I swear I raised him better. I like the last sentence here. That's a nice way to cap this off. Good stuff. A lot of great details here, Esther. I would say try to aim for more definite language. There's a lot of just kind of a few of, you see every time it says something like there's a couple of candy wrappers, a couple of belts. You can just be a little more specific and just tell us how many belts there. You can say there's 5 belts there. You can just like tell us exactly what you see.
Okay.
And what else? Yeah, try to avoid changing tenses. If we're doing present tense, we're doing present tense. If we're doing past, we're doing past. We can't generally swap back and forth in between in the middle of a paragraph.
Okay. All right.
Small piece of luggage blocked the closet door. Again, just feels like we could be a little more specific, because a piece of luggage could be like a suitcase, it could be a duffel bag, it could be just something a little more concrete and specific.
All right.
Nice details though, and I like the sort of the guiding idea of the paragraph, which seems to be, I swear I raised him better. A nice way to kind of sum everything up at the end there.
By the way, I got his permission.
Oh, is this true life? Is this real?
Part of it. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So we won't
right.
even go into that. But yes, thank you. I'm just starting. I'm not experienced like all of you, and
That's okay.
I'm not a heavy reader either. My brother was, but I never picked that up, so I didn't start until 5 years ago. So
that's okay. Yeah, let me.
So I'm trying. I'm working on it.
Yeah. No, you're doing fine. Let me give you a tip. So these are really nice details, and when you have a lot of details, sometimes they sort of blend together, and it's best to maybe just pick a couple that we can use to stand in for everything. So imagine, like, if you're describing a really rundown house, right? You might just describe one really broken window, like an ugly, smudged window with the cracks webbing through it that's caked with years of grime. And that might sort of help us just picture the whole thing, even though you don't have to then go on to list a bunch of other details. So that's something that might just be something that might help you in the future. Fewer details that are more specific, even if they don't give you like the full picture of a thing, they help us imagine the full picture of the thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Looks like we have one more of these, and then, or maybe do we have one from Carmen as well? Okay, let's do 2 more, and I think I'd rather focus more on prose today, and we'll talk more premise next time, though. If you haven't, you should be aiming to try to figure out what your premise is as soon as you can. Next week, by the end of class, next Saturday, you want to have your premise totally figured out. But this week, keep working on it, and maybe start thinking of what my logline might be. We'll talk more about loglines next class. That's, again, one single sentence that expresses what your story is about. Don't worry too much about it yet, but just be thinking, what is my book? How do I explain it? What is all these things that we've talked about so far, like target market, and tense in voice. How am I going to pick my POV that I use? All these things. Let's look at one more paragraph, and then we will wrap up for today. Let's read Nacho's paragraph.
Yeah. Actually, I think Carmen posted before, but
did she post before? Okay.
She posted in the wrong channel. So
Go ahead on Nacho's. Okay. I can wait on mine. I'm going to be at the lab today, so.
Oh, okay, great.
That's okay.
It isn't urgent.
Okay, we'll do Nacho's right now just because it's right in front of me, but I'd be glad to look at Carmen's in the lab. Alright, so I scan the mound of ivory powder again. Tiny tracks trace the windswept ridge and disappear under a fallen log. And let me just make sure I understand. I scan the mound of ivory powder. I'm imagining this is like ivory powder. What is ivory powder? I'm imagining like a pile of cocaine. Is that what this means? Tiny tracks trace the windswept ridge and disappear under a fallen log. I'm a little lost now. The wind stings my eyes as I peer into the mottled shadows. No hare's eye winks back at me. Dinner will be nothing but the last few rancid nuts in my pack. A warm bowl of flurries and wind's breath, my father would say. Our meager cache of dried elk, moose, and trout ran out long ago. Okay, some great stuff here. I just got a little lost in the very beginning. Nacho, can you help us understand what are we looking at here? What do you mean a mound of ivory powder?
So it's supposed to be snow.
Oh.
So she's
okay.
This is like a kind of someone who lives in a very cold place, and they're kind of like hunter-gatherers in this area.
Okay. I see what you mean. So yeah, just without the context, when I scan a mound of ivory powder, I'm thinking someone's looking at a pile of cocaine on a table. I don't know what that says about me. But with just now that I know what you're exactly. Now that I know what you're saying, tiny tracks trace the windswept ridge. So she's looking at like a hill, like covered in snow. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're on a ridge, and she's trying to find a rabbit.
Okay.
To eat.
They disappear under a fallen log. The wind stings my eyes as I peer into the mottled shadows. But you mean the shadows under the log. So I think we're just it feels like we're just missing a little tissue between some of these that would make this really shine. So something like, I knelt down next to the log and peered into its dark mouth or something. Do we just need that part at the beginning that helps us? The paragraphs, or the sentences are very well written. And I love this part where, what was it? A bowl of flurries and wind's breath. That's brilliant stuff. I feel like I was having a little trouble just picturing the action due to the connecting clauses between some of these sentences. So, I think we just need a sentence for approaching the log and lifting it up or looking inside. That would really help us understand this. And then, usually we don't want to say what things aren't happening, like no hare's eye winks back at me. But here I kind of see what you mean. Normally we would just want to say what is there instead. So that's just a general. I'm not going to say that's the right move for this paragraph, but in general, instead of saying I opened the door and my dad was not there, you would say something like I opened the door, darkness, silence, right? But I see what you mean here, and it did sort of clarify what she was in fact looking for. So it did help us understand. But in the context of a book is very different from just a very separate, isolated paragraph, right? Any comments on this, Nacho? Was I pretty much right on the money with this, or anything I missed here?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Probably needs a little more, connecting phrases or something, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Nacho. So I think we are pretty much at the end of our time for now. I'm hearing someone talking on a mic. Is someone talking on their mic? No questions? Okay. So let's look at our last slides here, which are going to clarify what to do for next time, and we're going to talk about what's coming up. So if you have not signed up, make sure to do that. Scriptcamp.net/membership to get your unlimited membership, 2-week free trial for as many, including today's lab at 4 o'clock. You can go to scriptcamp.net/classes or /membership. What's for next time? So for next week, we're going to look at log lines. This week, just be filling out your sketchbook and be reading. And if you did not read something for this class, read something for next class. And if you did not write a paragraph for this class and you want to get feedback on your general style and voice and a paragraph of your work, then bring that next class too. It would be the same as what we were doing right here. Go ahead.
I'm just going to mention to everyone, so all you need to do, if you plan to join the 12-week camp, all you need to do is vote yes in the poll. So if is everyone able to see where that is in chat? Just vote yes, and you'll be able to get immediate access to all the bootcamp channels. And yeah, if you have any questions, let us know. Looks like Asmani has questions.
Feel free to ask any questions you have on anything we talked about today or anything about the course. If not, you can email Conor at scriptcamp.net, or you can message them to me or Nacho. Okay, everyone clear on what to do for next week? Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I have one thing, because I don't share my paragraph because I'm a little bit sick. And if I share my paragraph next time in your mail, will you check it, please? Because
Sure.
I have a paragraph. In fact, it's not a paragraph, about 2,000 or 3,000 almost short story writing, and based on true story. I want to share it.
Oh, well, we have a channel on WordCamp just called Share Your Work, or we have a couple channels for sharing if you have longer things to post. For the assignment, it was just a single paragraph, which would be like 4 to 8 sentences, more or less. So if you write that for next time, I'd be glad to review that in class.
Okay.
All right, thank you for that. Any other questions or clarifications that you guys need? Maybe we can link the chat channel that you can use for that in our class chat here. Go ahead.
Are you going to repeat what we're supposed to do for next time?
Sure. So for next time, you are going to read something. If you didn't write a paragraph for this time, you should write that for next time. You're going to be working on your sketchbook, which is just your, that document where you keep all your ideas and research in the same place. You're going to be continuing to develop that, figuring out what your story is, and that's really it. So next time, by the end of next class, we're going to try to figure out that one sentence that's going to act as your logline for your book. So this week, just be brainstorming for that.
Okay.
Just a question. Queen Esther and anyone else, are you planning to join the 12-week bootcamp but aren't able to see like where to vote? You can just let us know and we can give you access. You can just tell us now by voice if that's easier.
Okay. Yeah, I want to. See, that's my problem. I can't find it.
That's okay. We'll help you out.
I'd like to. Yeah.
Awesome. We'd be glad to have you. And we will, after we're going to finish this class up here, but we can send you a message or email if that is useful for you, and we can include some instructions or some tips on what to do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome Queen Esther and Asmani. So you've just been, your account on the Discord has been updated, so now you have access to all those channels. Was there anyone else who was planning to join the bootcamp, but you weren't able to vote in the poll? Did you need some help to get access to those bootcamp channels? Just let us know. You can call out or type in the chat if that's easier, or just unmute.
All right, and once you have access to those, then you can immediately start chatting with your other fellow members of our servers, building that peer group and that community of people who will be reading your work and you'll be reading their work. You can just start meeting people, participating in activities and labs if you want to, or if you want to just show up for the classes, that's all fine too. We also have a video library where you can review any of these in the future that you missed, or that you want to check out what's going on in another class. All right, that's going to wrap us up for today. Thank you for coming to this novel bootcamp. Week 2 next week, we're going to get those log lines done, so just keep brainstorming, keep adding to that sketchbook this week, and read. Must read something. I recommend reading a complete novella or novelette by next time, unless you can read a complete novel in a week, which not everyone can do, but if you can, more power to you. Just be ready to talk about what did you read for next class. All right, that's it for today. Lab is at 4 o'clock, so come back in 2 hours if you have up to 5 pages of work that you want feedback on, or questions or topics that you would just like to hear expanded upon. And tomorrow we have our feature class 11 to 1 and then I will be doing fantasy group from 5 to 6 o'clock. Thanks, guys. We hope to see you at another Script Camp class soon.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.